Every registered weapon in the Camborn throne wing went dark at once. Every rifle, every powered lock, every blast door, silenced in the same half-second, the same way a held breath stops being a breath and just becomes stillness. The only person still working, 2 floors down in a maintenance crawl space, was a debt-bonded human the registrar had logged as unarmed. 14 minutes later, she was holding that breach alone. When I asked her how, she didn't reach for a weapon. She reached for a fire suppression line, 9 kitchen blades, and the gutted optics of a dead security drone. And she said, "I don't need one. I make my own." She has no permit, Provost Kaelvorn said afterward, staring at the wreckage of what she'd built. No registered arm. Nothing on file. She doesn't need one, Provost, I told him. Look at what's in her hands. I am Castellan Row Ilvinth, Master-at-Arms of the Camborn Court, and it is my duty, has been my duty for 41 cycles, to catalog every object permitted within 300 paces of the Queen. I am good at my duty. My quill crest, which flattens tight against my neck whenever a procedural irregularity crosses my desk, has not misfired in 11 years. It misfired the day Talia Duarte's registrar file crossed my desk. Bonded labor, maintenance, unarmed, no weapons permit required. 61 words, and every one of them was, by the letter of Camborn law, correct. Her salvage freighter had been impounded 8 months earlier in the Ithra border dispute. A routine seizure, the kind that happens 4 times a cycle and means nothing to anyone but the crew who lose their ship. The debt bond put her hands to work in the sublevels. Dead relay gaskets, jammed portcullis gears, warming units the court's own engineers had already condemned as scrap. I filed her under maintenance and thought about her exactly as often as I thought about anyone assigned to fix things beneath a Master-at-Arms' notice. Which is to say, not at all, until the portcullis gear she'd replaced turned out to be a bent length of ceremonial processional rail, recut and rethreaded by hand, and the warming unit she'd rebuilt for the nursery wing was running on a fuel cell salvage from a ration case nobody had opened in 6 years. Nothing Talia Duarte touched stayed broken, and nothing she fixed ever needed the part it was designed for. By the 3rd such report, my crest would not stay flat. I began reading her maintenance logs the way I read threat assessments. Not because I believed she was dangerous, but because I had cataloged 11,000 objects in my career, and I did not have a category for a person whose entire relationship to material was that nothing was finished being useful. The first time Queen Seraphine Volume 50 met her was an accident of geography, not protocol. The Queen's private study had lost heat 2 winters running, and the household staff, none of whom considered a debt-bonded mechanic worth introducing by name, simply sent the maintenance woman up to fix it. Talia Duarte spent 40 minutes on her knees behind the Queen's own writing desk, said perhaps 6 words the entire time, and left the warming coil running 20% more efficiently than the model it had replaced. I asked her once why she rebuilt condemned parts instead of simply requisitioning new ones. Her answer was the closest thing she ever gave me to a philosophy. Nothing stays scrap, she said. It just hasn't found its use yet. What is her name? The Queen asked me afterward. And why does no one at this court seem to know it? I did not have a good answer. That bothered me more than I expected it to. If you've ever fixed something everyone else had already thrown away, tell me where you're watching from. I like to know how many of you understand her before I did. I decided to watch her work. What I found in the sub-level scrap bay 11 days later was not, by any registrar's definition, a weapon. It was a dead court security drone, gutted, its optics rerouted into what looked like a short-range signal disruptor, wired together with tunic thread because Talia Duarte did not believe in wasting good wire on a prototype. That's not on any work order, I said. She didn't startle. She wiped grease from her hands with a rag that had, until recently, been someone's dress uniform, and looked at me the way a person looks at a supervisor they've decided not to be afraid of yet. The drone was dead, she said. Its optics weren't. Seemed wasteful to bury a working part with a broken machine. That reasoning will not satisfy Provost Dorn. Then don't tell Provost Dorn. I should have. I did not, because I wanted to know what a scrapyard mechanic did with 3 unsupervised weeks and a court's worth of things nobody else wanted. I have regretted many procedural choices in 41 cycles of service. I have never regretted that one. Provost Kaelvorn found out on his own 2 weeks later, and unlike me, he did tell himself the truth about what he was looking at. A signal disruptor, he said, holding the gutted drone up between two claws like evidence at a tribunal, which, functionally, it was. Built from court property. Unregistered. Unauthorized. Castellan, I do not care how useful her mending has been. This is precisely what my office exists to prevent. He was not wrong. That is what made it difficult. Provost Dorn had spent 19 cycles keeping unregistered weapons away from the Queen, and every rule he was invoking existed for a real reason, written after a real assassination attempt 2 reigns before this one. He looked at Talia Duarte's scrap bay and saw, correctly, someone with the raw capability to arm herself out of nothing. He simply had no framework for the idea that capability and intention were different questions. Confine her to the maintenance sublevels, he told the duty roster. Revoke fabrication access. Effective immediately. I found her that night, sitting against a coolant pipe in the sublevel corridor, the confinement order already posted above her bunk, turning the bent metal bracelet on her left wrist over and over between her fingers. She had never once in 8 months taken it off. They're going to take the scrap bay, she said before I'd said anything. Aren't they? The provost believes you present a fabrication risk. He's right. She said it flatly, without argument, which surprised me more than a denial would have. I could build something dangerous in there. I could build something dangerous in a supply closet, Castellan. That was never the question that mattered. Then what is the question? She was quiet long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer. When she did, her voice had lost the flatness. I don't know who I am without something broken in front of me, she said. My crew, Dawson Vance, we ran salvage together for 6 years. Didn't make it out of the ship the court impounded. I made this, she held up the bracelet, the night after we buried what was left of them because I needed my hands to have somewhere to go that wasn't grief. If you take the bay, you're not confiscating a workshop. You're taking away the only thing keeping me steady enough to function in a court that already decided what I'm worth before I open my mouth. I have interviewed war criminals with steadier voices than that. My crest, I will admit, did not flatten. It rose, the reflex reserved, in my species, for something closer to grief than alarm. I cannot override the provost's order, I told her, which was true and which I hated saying. I know, she said. I'm not asking you to. If you take one thing from this record before we reach what happened 4 nights later, let it be this. Humanity does not manufacture its resourcefulness in a laboratory. It is, near as I have been able to determine from the archive of Terran history Talia allowed me to access, simply how the species survives being what it is. Their planet's own record shows a species without natural armor, without venom, without the raw musculature of half the war-capable life on their world, that nonetheless outcompeted predators 3 times its body mass. Not through strength, but by turning stone into an edge, then bone into a needle, then scrap metal salvage from 2 world wars into field radios, prosthetic limbs, and, Talia's own words, whatever the situation demanded and nobody had thought to manufacture yet. Their opposable thumb is unremarkable among primates. What is remarkable is a species that spent 300,000 years treating nothing here is finished being useful as a survival strategy rather than a personality quirk. Their own historical record shows soldiers stranded without supply lines building working radios from crystal, wire, and razor blades. It shows medics who ran out of proper splints reaching for rifle stocks and packing crates instead because a broken leg does not care what the wood was originally for. It shows an entire discipline, they call it in one of their languages, field expedient repair, that exists for no reason other than the fact that humans have never fully believed an object stops being useful just because its intended purpose ran out. Camborn registrar law had no entry for that, because no other species in the coalition needed one. 2 of Talia's fellow debt bonds mocked her for it. In the mess hall, the week before the rite, called her the Scrapwright to her face, loud enough that I heard it from the corridor. She didn't argue. She finished her meal, thanked the cook for the extra portion, and went back to the sublevels to keep fixing things for people who had just insulted her to her face. I asked her, later, why she hadn't defended herself. Being right isn't loud, she said. It's just still there in the morning. If a species that spends its whole history turning discarded things into exactly what it needs next hasn't earned your subscription yet, stay for the next 14 minutes, then decide. The Accession Rite was 7 days later. 11 allied houses in the throne wing to formally seat Queen Seraphine Val's reign. Every relay in the palace running at full load to carry the ceremonial broadcast across 3 systems. I stood post at the Queen's left shoulder, as I had at every state function for 11 cycles, and Talia Duarte was 2 floors below in the crawl space, off-duty, coaxing one more winter out of a warming unit the engineers had condemned twice. The Ashgrave Combine had been trying to force Queen Seraphine Volume 50 to sign the Ithra Moon salvage rights to them for 2 cycles, through petition, through blockade, through 3 separate trade sanctions that had cost the Combine more than the moon was worth. A puppet region installed during the chaos of failed accession would have cost them nothing at all. It was, I want to be clear, never a matter of hatred. It was a business decision, and business decisions are, in my experience, far more dangerous than hatred, because they do not require anyone to be angry to pull the trigger. The dampener charge went off in the relay conduit at the exact second the Queen rose to speak her oath. Every registered weapon in the throne wing died in the same half-second. Royal Guard rifles reduced to very expensive clubs and armored hands. The blast doors frozen mid-cycle. My own sidearm a dead weight on my hip. 11 houses of witnesses, and not one working weapon between them. Talia Duarte heard the relay conduit fail from 2 floors down and did not wait for an order that no working comm channel could have delivered anyway. What she built in the next 14 minutes, I have since cataloged in full, because cataloging things is what I do, and because someone was eventually going to ask me to prove this actually happened. A fire suppression line, rerouted and pressurized, became a brace strong enough to hold a half-sealed blast door against a forced entry charge rated to open it in under 40 seconds. 9 kitchen blades from the processional feast, still warm from the ovens, became the pins that held the brace in place once the hydraulics gave out. The dead security drone's optics, the same ones Provost Dorn had confiscated as evidence 3 weeks earlier and then, in the chaos, abandoned on a supply cart, became a short-range jammer that scrambled the combined breach team's coordination for the 6 minutes that mattered most. Her spinal alignment is compromised from holding that brace at that angle, a Royal Guard sergeant said, staring at the readout on his deadweight rifle's medical overlay, the only working sensor he had left. She should not be able to stand like that. She's not standing on strength, I told him, because by then I understood something Provost Dorn hadn't yet. She's standing on the fact that nobody told her humans are supposed to run out of things to fix. Queen Seraphine Volume 50 would not evacuate the wing without her. Your Majesty, the breach is being held by a woman my own registrar logged as unarmed, the Queen said, not moving from where she stood 2 paces behind Talia's brace, close enough that if the door failed, it failed on both of them. I would like to see what the Camborn Court has been overlooking. The bracelet came apart in the last minute of the breach, the bent metal finally giving under the strain of holding a jury-rig pin in place. And Talia caught the 2 halves before they could fall, and for 1 second, mid-crisis, with a forced entry charge screaming against the door held together by kitchen knives, she looked more frightened of losing that bracelet than of the combined soldiers on the other side of it. "It's the last piece of my ship," she said, when I asked her afterward why. "The hull, after Doss and Vance. I forged it the night we buried them. I've never let out of arm's reach since. I wasn't ready to lose it tonight, Castellan. That's the truth, and I don't especially care how that sounds. It sounds, for what my professional opinion is worth, after 41 cycles of cataloging objects that mattered to the people who carried them, exactly like the only sane response available to her. The Ashgrave breach team withdrew at the 6-minute mark, their jam coordination and their collapsed timetable costing them the element of surprise they'd paid 2 cycles to build. But they tried once more, at minute 9, with a secondary charge meant for exactly this contingency. Talia had already stripped the ceremonial processional rail's second length of ornamental chain and woven it through the brace's weakest joint, on the theory that a charge rated for 1 failure point would not account for 2. The second charge blew the brace half a hand's width outward and no further. Reinforcements reached the throne wing at minute 11. Talia Duarte held what was left of the seal for 3 minutes past that, alone, because she did not trust the replacement door until she'd inspected the hinge pins herself. I filed the after-action salvage logged away. I file every after-action report as an inventory item by item because that is the only language my office has ever spoken. 61 distinct fabrications recovered from the breach site. A fire suppression line rerouted into a structural brace. 9 kitchen blades reforged into load-bearing pins. A confiscated drone's optics rebuilt into a jammer. 61 entries. 0 of them registered as arms, because not one of them had been an arm 20 minutes before the charge went off. The structural log recorded the rest without my help. An unpowered blast door held sealed by improvised brace for 14 minutes and 20 seconds against a breach charge rated to open it in under 40. Provost Kaelvorn read that log standing beside me in the archive 2 days later, and to his credit, and I want this on the permanent record because he does not receive enough credit in most tellings of this incident. He did not argue with it. I was right that she could build something dangerous from nothing, he said. I was wrong about what that made her. The council convened 4 days after that. An older counselor, reviewing the precedent registry before the vote, cited a ruling I recognized from 2 cycles past, a hegemony reform, the Voss provision, that had settled a similar question for a different reason entirely. As it was decided then, she said, a species does not get to define a human ceiling for them. Nobody in the chamber needed the reference explained. It simply meant the ground had been prepared before Talia Duarte ever stood on it. Queen Seraphine Volume 50 signed the Scrapwright's provision into Camborn, and, within the season, Coalition, registrar law herself. Every bonded or contracted human on a Kessimar world would now be logged with guaranteed access to an open fabrication bay. And the word unarmed, as a threat classification applied to any human, was struck from the registry entirely, not replaced, because the council could not agree on a category crude enough to hold what they'd actually seen. I recatalogued Talia Duarte's own registrar entry myself, the day the provision took effect. I crossed out unarmed, no weapons permit required. I wrote nothing in its place. There wasn't a word for it yet, and I was not going to invent a bad one just to fill the space. 18 years later, a Kessimar engineer named Naira Vess, who watched the breach from the nursery wing as a hatchling, oversees court fabrication across 3 houses. She was a bracelet forged in Talia Duarte's exact style, and every registrar she oversees now keeps an open scrap bay as standard practice. She still tells new apprentices about the night she watched a species with no natural armor hold a door shut with kitchen knives and decide that was enough. Talia Duarte herself stayed at Camborn. She still keeps the sub-level scrap bay, still fixes what everyone else has already written off. And if you ask her, I have asked her, she'll tell you it was never really about the 14 minutes in the throne wing. It was about a court finally agreeing with something she told me months earlier, standing over a dead warming coil. Nothing stays scrap. It just hasn't found its use yet. Not a warming unit. Not a dead drone. Not a debt-bonded mechanic the registrar once logged in 61 words and got every single one of them technically right and still managed to miss the truth entirely. Galactic Archive, record number 128, closed. Codified law. The Scrapwright's provision, codified year 3149. Cross-reference restricted. The dampener technology recovered from the Ashgrave breach team matched no registered manufacturer in the Coalition database. The only flagged entry in the registry that came close was a single redacted line, filed under a name no one at Camborn has been able to explain since. The Silent Fleet. That file remains open. I still keep her bracelet's twin, the half she gave me the week the provision passed, in my own quarters. Not cataloged, not filed, not assigned a threat classification of any kind. Some objects, I have learned, are not meant to be inventoried. They are meant to be kept. If this is the kind of record you want more of, humanity underestimated, then quietly, permanently proven wrong, subscribe, and I'll keep opening the archive for you, one closed record at a time.